Hello, and good morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on when you are tuning in to this latest episode of Edie's Susty Talk, our video interview series designed to keep us all feeling a bit more connected and informed with the sustainability conversation during COVID-19 and beyond. I'm delighted to have Jojo Mehta on the call today, and she is the co-founder of Stop Ecocide International, something that's been in the news a fair bit, I think, in recent weeks, and as you've just mentioned, in the House of Lords this week as well. So thank you so much, Jojo, for taking the time.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And with you, whereabouts are you calling from? Are you at home today?
I am indeed. I'm in Stroud in Gloucestershire in the west of England.
Great. And is it as warm there as it has been for us in the southeast?
It is absolutely sweltering. It's a challenge staying completely focused in this heat, and yeah, really makes me feel strongly for those in North America at the moment.
Yes, of course. And yeah, it's making me feel a bit of eco anxiety as well. I'm not going to lie. So hopefully we can have some positives coming out of today's discussion. I guess the obvious point to start with is yourself and your career. And for those not aware of Stop Ecocide International, a bit about what it does. So essentially, could you tell us about what the organisation does and what motivated you to help set it up?
Absolutely. I set up this public campaign, Stop Ecocide International, alongside UK legal pioneer and barrister Polly Higgins back in 2017. Polly dedicated the last 10 years of her life, she's no longer with us sadly, to promoting this concept of making damage and destruction to nature, or ecocide, an international crime. And we met up in 2014, and I'd heard about her work before, and I remember thinking when I did, that sounds like the biggest game in town. Little did I know at the time that we would end up working very closely together for the last 4.5 years of her life, and that in the years subsequent, so the last couple of years, this campaign has really taken off at the global level. I came to this through environmental campaigning, Polly came to it from the legal side, and that combination, if you like, was what gave birth to the campaign.
Fantastic. And I wanted to look at where it's gone since then, essentially. I think the headline we'll have all seen a couple of weeks back now is the fact that a legal definition of ecocide was published. So that was in June. It was put together by an independent expert panel. Doubtless your campaign had a lot to do with that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's in that definition and why that is such an important milestone.
It really is an important milestone. It's been a really key moment for the campaign. So we've been working on this for many, many years in terms of raising the profile of the possibility of criminalising ecocide. And there have been working definitions in the past, where Polly had one, and there have been others created by lawyers. But it's always been in the context of, lawyers essentially saying, we believe this should be, this should come into existence, and here's what we think it should say. The difference with the work that's just been completed is that it arose in response to political demand. Effectively, the political appetite has changed a lot in the last couple of years as people become increasingly aware of the global nature of the crisis that we're facing with climate and with biodiversity loss and ecological damage. And that's come from some key reports that have come out, global reports such as the IPCC report or last year's World Wildlife Fund report. There have been a number, but it's also been because of the climate mobilizations at grassroots that have happened over the last couple of years, whether that's the school strikes, whether that's Extinction Rebellion, effectively ordinary people raising the alarm and saying, we really want this to be addressed, and in a way kind of dragging the politicians into that discussion and opening up that media conversation. And into that space, our campaign has kind of landed after being present for many years. It's finally not seeming like an extreme solution, but actually common sense to simply say this much damage is not okay. And in response to that, we had parliamentarians from Sweden actually last year approach us and say, could you commission a legal definition of ecocide that could seriously be considered by states, by governments, to take forward at the International Criminal Court as a possible amendment. And so on the basis of that, we were able to pull together some really top legal talent from around the world, including one of our co-chairs was Philippe Sands QC from the UK, who's world-renowned barrister, but also author who's written about the coining of international crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity. So wonderfully placed to do this work, alongside a Senegalese jurist, Diofal Sow, and 10 other panelists from all around the world. And so in turn, the credibility of that panel has also obviously lent weight to the definition that's emerged. But I think it's also been that thing of, for many years, people have been saying to us, both at the political level and, for example, from the corporate sector, but also from, on the ground activism and NGOs, what exactly do you mean by ecocide? So to have an actual text emerge, which is very concise as well, has been a real trigger for the world to say, okay, this is a real possibility. Here's a definition. Let's see who's going to respond to this and how are they going to respond. And so far, the response has been extraordinary in the sense that we had well over 100 pieces within the first week from global press, different publications, and also political progress as a result. So it really has been an amazing milestone in this work.
And you mentioned there that there's been some political progress already. So could you give us a flavour of that, and then really what are the next steps into getting this definition into the systems in the first instance?
Absolutely. So we'd seen, as I say, a gathering of momentum over the last couple of years from the bringing up of the subject by Pacific island state Vanuatu back in 2019 and echoed by island state the Maldives as well. But over the last while, we've also seen France, Belgium, Spain, Finland, Canada and Luxembourg all making some kind of indication of an interest in this definition, different ways in different countries. But just in the last few weeks since the definition emerged, we've already seen parliamentary committees in Bangladesh and in Belgium putting forward this definition. We saw 2 amendments placed into the Environment Bill in the UK in the House of Lords. And we've also seen in Chile, we just heard this a few days ago, that a parliamentary resolution was passed supporting this definition and suggesting that the government actually take it forward at the International Criminal Court. We don't necessarily expect the current Chilean government to do that, but they also have elections next year, so we live in hope. But what it shows is that this definition is being taken very seriously by political actors as well as by the press.
Great. Well, obviously we'll be watching that closely, and hopefully a bit more ahead of COP26 will be happening in that space. As a lot of our listeners are from businesses, I did want to come into the business part of this, because we're hearing increasingly, as you say, that this is just rising up the agenda, and that's the case for the private sector as well. We seem to be having science-based targets that go beyond, we're going to be doing less harm, to, we need to target net positivity. We've been seeing renewed interest after previous deforestation targets went unmet. So I wanted to ask really what the business role is here. So for those that are listening from businesses that are leading, I'd love to hear what you think they could do to help with this cause, and then also whether that will ultimately be enough to push back against those lobby bodies who might not want these laws to be implemented.
It's a really interesting question, and it's also a very, very important aspect of the narrative of this as it evolves, because those who are leading in the sustainability space in the corporate world, we believe, will be welcoming this, because what it does is it creates a parameter, it creates a tool that contextualizes business practice, and that has the potential to really level the playing field. Because at the moment, those who do want to do the right thing, and there really are plenty of them out there, as we are discovering, and I imagine that many of your listeners will be in that category, it's difficult when you know that you're disadvantaged, potentially economically or competitively disadvantaging yourself by doing the right thing, because it's more costly, because the old polluting ways are still effectively either permitted or allowed to go unchecked. What that means is that it's hard to really sort of press ahead with what needs to be done, or to really unleash the kind of creativity and innovation that's required. I mean, we tend to think of this, or I like to think of it a bit like, I don't know if you remember that cookery program, Ready Steady Cook. Where you'd be given, a time limit and a set of parameters, in other words, a set of ingredients. And, your challenge was to create the most beautiful, delicious dish possible in that time. And that is the attitude that we believe this needs to be approached with. Yes, on one level, the whole point of it is it's an enforceable deterrent. It's a kind of hard stop that says, beyond this point, beyond this amount of damage, thou shalt not go. But what that also does is creates, a beautiful parameter within which the business world, and indeed the investment world, the world of insurance, can be looking and saying, OK, this may not be here now, but it's coming down the line. And actually, we know it's inevitable at some point. What we're trying to do is accelerate that point so that it's useful, rather than, a last ditch attempt to save the last few ecosystems on the planet. So obviously, given that this is coming down the line, and we would estimate around 4 to 5 years to begin ratification of this. So those who want to be kind of ahead of the game, but also who want to be doing the right thing and actually really moving towards a thriving relationship with nature rather than a destructive one, is to say, OK, well, when this parameter is coming in place, how are we going to be approaching what we do in our particular area of expertise or our particular sector? How are we going to be addressing that so that we're not crossing that line? And it's not the case that people will be, we certainly, hope that this won't be the case, that people will be thinking about how to just stay on the right side of this line. And this is one of the things that criminal law actually, is in which criminal law is different to civil regulation, because I think a lot of corporates treat regulation as a sort of very specific set of rules that they can work out how to stay just on the right side of. But you don't do that with criminal law. I mean, nobody sits there and says, how do we stay just on the right side of murdering 500 people? I mean, you don't try and stay just on the right side of that. You don't try and nearly kill someone, but not quite. You kind of go, well, actually, we don't want to go in that direction because someone might die. So we're going to go in this direction. And that's the attitude change that we believe this law can begin to create. Because at the moment, our kind of legal system is strongly focused on people and especially on property. But at the moment, it doesn't take, environmental law is simply not taken as seriously. And what this can do is create a kind of gravitas and a sense of weight around environmental law that isn't currently there. So it will not only create a sort of ultimately a hard stop for a certain level of damage, but it will actually create a steer for the whole of the way that our economy operates, because we'll be then starting to take that morally seriously as well as legally seriously.
Of course, and that's a lot of food for thought there. Everything moving as well. We've talked there about some of the big drivers of change. So as well as law, we've got updated science, we've got changing investor and consumer demands, we've got changing policy, but then we've also got a big UN event on the horizon. So hopefully before COP26, we will be having the 15th biodiversity COP. The UN recently put out its first draft for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework that will form the basis of the negotiations. Obviously post-2020, and that was meant to take place last year, 3 delays now because of COVID. So I'd love to round off this conversation, Jojo, by looking at what you would like to see coming out of that. So what is your wish list for the biodiversity COP?
Well, ideally, we would love ecocide to get specific mention in there. A few months ago, we didn't even think that, the concept of nature having rights, for example, might be included. But it looks like, at least in a tentative way, it has been included. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether ecocide can also end up as part of that framework. With the speed that the conversation is growing, we do believe that that's possible, and we do have one of our associate teams is working on that particular aspect of the CBD conference. So we have strong hopes for that. And I think that one of the things that's been important in the last couple of months has been the emergence of that combination report between the IPCC and IPBES, which showed that dealing with the climate crisis and dealing with the ecological crisis must be done together.
Yes.
And so there's a way in which the law of ecocide can actually address that and address both those aspects, because we see climate change, if you like, as a symptom, and ecocide, in other words, serious destruction of ecosystems over decades, we see as a root cause of that crisis. And so, the conventional biodiversity is going to be hugely important, because if we only address emissions or only address, the carbon situation, we're not ultimately going to be, really shifting practices, because if the kind of on the ground damage that is happening to ecosystems continues, it doesn't matter how much ambition we've got, we are going to have to look at, biodiversity loss, ecosystem damage, and habitat destruction, all of those things that can be addressed by the CBD. So it will be very important in that respect.
Of course, and hopefully we can touch base around about that October-November time, if I'm not yet completely run off my feet, as I'm expecting I might be. But Jojo, for today, that's all we have time for. So thank you so much for your insight today.
You're really welcome. It's been great.